questions on what signs there are during the end times. And the next thing that Jesus brings up is increasing conflict between nations. And he told his disciples that they would hear of wars and rumors of wars, and that kingdoms and nations will rise against each other. And for the disciples, this kind of conflict was all too real under the authority of Rome. And if you didn't know already, Rome was a global superpower in the ancient world, and their rule was built on conquest. So during this time period, there were a lot of battles, revolts, and uprisings that involved tons of people groups. So Jesus was teaching his disciples that these kinds of conflicts, unfortunately, would not disappear, and that they would continue as history moved toward the end. And something that I find interesting today is that wars and conflicts between nations are already pretty heated. It was just in the past century that World War I and World War II happened. And since then, tension has only grown more. And with the war going on between Russia and Ukraine, as well as the ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine, and on top of all of that, the relationship between the US and China, it almost seems as if all of this is potentially setting the stage for another world war. And I'm just speculating, but all of this makes me really consider what Jesus said here in this passage. And I'm not saying all of this to be dark and pessimistic. I'm just saying that believers should look at war and see it as a sign of Jesus' return. And then to remember what Jesus said, because after he said that there would be war, he said, don't be alarmed or be frightened, because these wars must take place. So what I want you to see here is that even though war can be a scary thing, it's also a sign of Jesus' return. And when he returns, he'll finally put an end to all injustice and bring everlasting peace to all his people. Sign number 3, widespread calamities. Matthew chapter 24, verse 7b. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. So after Jesus talked about how there will be nations and kingdoms rising against each other, Jesus then said that there will be famine and earthquakes all over the place. And having lived in the US and Japan, I think famine can be difficult to understand for some people, especially if you have stores and supermarkets filled with food. But back then, famine meant empty fields after months of hard labor, livestock that couldn't be used as food anymore, and families struggling to find any food at all. And famine in the Bible seemed to be an indicator of God's judgment, and it also was a test of faith for God's people to rely on his provision. And then there's earthquakes. You know, one of our Impact team members, Johnny, was telling me how earthquakes tend to happen after significant events in the Bible. One occurred after Jesus' crucifixion, one during his resurrection, and an earthquake will mark the end of the 7th seal judgment, 7th trumpet judgment, and 7th bowl judgment, according to Revelation. So from what we read about earthquakes from Scripture, earthquakes are normally tied to God shifting or changing direction. And I say all of this because earthquakes can be indicators that God is moving. Now, I'm not saying that every single earthquake comes directly from God, but I do want to point out that Jesus did say that one of the signs of his return will be earthquakes. So when we hear in the news of an earthquake, it should honestly be a reminder of what Jesus said about the end times, and that pretty soon he'll be here. And finally, sign number 4, cold hatred. Matthew chapter 24, verses 9 to 10 and verse 12. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another.